for them to realize they need to take care of their personal aims so that they can better take care of the business aims or be more invigorated about the future that the business is creating. This is not something you need to do just for you, but you do have to start with you. There's no way you could make this a part of your company culture if it didn't start with you first.
It's good to be good.
Hello and welcome to Your Business, Your Wealth. I'm your host, Paul Adams, founder, CEO of Sound Financial Group, and I'm joined today by Cory Shepard, the man who wrote the book, Cape Not Required, and while that cape is not required, when he does wear it, it really brings out your eyes, Cory.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And just for the record, I don't know if folks are just tuning in for the first time. I'm not just joining today. I am also a host of the show. Just by the way you said that, maybe it sounded like I was a substitute teacher or something. So I just wanted folks to...
Everybody loves the substitute teacher, Cory. Like, I'm just trying to continue
play the movie.
To have you
got to
more
watch The
endeared.
Matrix. Yes.
Totally. Yeah, The Matrix during a math class was wonderful.
Right.
I found out later that's because the substitute teachers had too much to drink the night before. And then they just roll in the AV cart. And that's why on Monday mornings, do you remember in school they would fight over we were trying to get the AV cart, but we couldn't because Mrs. Gardner's class has it. But I think what was really happening is they all had too much to drink the night before, and then they're all bouncing back and forth. That's why near the staff Christmas party, it was very difficult to get an AV cart in your room.
Man, I can't believe that you talked me into planning to talk about drunk teachers at the beginning of this episode. I really should have said no to that.
I'm pretty sure we're going to get some letters on this one. That's my role. My role is to keep people writing in about the marginally offensive portions of our podcast and weekly show. So
this is true. Oh my gosh. Well, before we get to our topic for today, we like to bring back This Week in Planning. But before we get to This Week in Planning, I just want to point out that you might notice that we have gone to every other week for releasing our episodes. So just wanted you to know that that's intentional. You didn't miss it last week. We're trying this to start the year because we're focusing more on producing some content in other mediums, our YouTube standalones, some additional articles, some additional books. So this is not us giving you less content, but diversifying our content. And diversifying that allocation is a very important step, as you might have heard somewhere on the webs.
We're academically allocating and globally diversifying our content.
That's right. That's right. Oh my gosh.
Well, speaking of This Week in Planning, I ran across this article and I thought this is one we have to talk about on the show. And this one's from Business Insider. And for those of you watching on YouTube, you could see it. For those of you listening, the title is 6 Signs You Probably Need a Financial Advisor, Even If You Think You Don't. And so I thought, okay, that's worth looking at. So I go to scan through the article. I'm going to quickly read all 6 points. There's some things we could say about the first 5, but we're going to focus on number 6 because it is the way the financial services industry attempts to relate to you as the consumer. And Cory and I talk about this stuff as having been behind the curtain, like in The Wizard of Oz. Like, we already know what's behind that curtain. We try to communicate that to you on a consistent, ongoing basis, not in a way to denigrate anybody else, but just to uncover the reality of what the mechanisms are behind the scenes that are impacting the way that you're delivered advice every day in every medium. So the first ones are, you're a high earner in a top tax bracket. Okay, so if you make a lot of income, you should. You know you need to take action, but keep putting it off. You're not on the same page with your spouse when it comes to finances. You owe back taxes and can't figure out why. Cory, I know we weren't going to go deep on this one, but would you just, I really liked your feedback on that point.
It seems like somewhere along the line, a war started between financial advisors and CPAs to capture 100% of everyone's hearts and minds. And it just doesn't need to be the case. And I know
it's like an episode of Mean Girls.
It's
every time a CPA and advisor in the traditional standpoint are back and forth. They're not being a client's team. They're just being mean girls.
They're just being mean girls to each other. And that doesn't have to be the case. We have some good friends who are CPAs that's like basically all that they do is help with these very intense IRS issues. And if you have a big amount of back taxes, then I would rather you have that person on your team to solve that issue than me, frankly. Now, I would be there to help understand the overall context of everything, both now into the future and looking backward. But you got to have that CPA in your team too.
Well, and for that matter, it's like, frankly, a financial advisor can't represent you in front of the IRS. They can't help you set up your payment plan. There's a lot that they like legally can't do. So I'm not even sure why that's there.
Yeah.
You don't know if you're on track for retirement. And number 6, you don't have time or the desire to learn about personal finance. Now, this is the main point. The entire financial services industry, I remember being trained and growing up in this business a little over 20 years ago. And the main thing they continue to drill on us in training every day is that what you want to do is have clients that are so easy that they just say, I totally trust you. I will do whatever you say. That is like the golden hallmark of what an advisor would want out of their client relationships every day. And for those of you who are listening, who are clients of ours, who have ever come close to saying anything like that to us, you have heard us say back to you that is not going to fly, because you have to understand these decisions. Now, like I usually do, let me frame this up in a way that is only slightly offensive, but probably not offensive enough for you to stop listening. If you're one of those spouses, or you have one of those spouses, like in all likelihood, if you're the spouse that doesn't enjoy finance, you're probably not listening to this episode. But on the rare occasion that somebody, you're riding in the car with them and they put this episode on, which, by the way, I've heard some of our clients do to their close friends, like, you better get better at money, and they just play an episode.
Sneak it in there.
They really do. Like I've heard 3 clients specifically say, "Oh, I need to refer you to somebody because I forced them to listen to an episode of your podcast." So here's the trouble. Imagine if you had children. You guys have heard me talk about this before. Imagine if you had children and then you said, well, I know they're going to be a part of my future, but really, I'm not a kid person. I let my spouse handle all the kid stuff. I'll be friends with them when they're teenagers. They're not going to like you when they're teenagers if they don't fall in love with you when they're little kids. Well, your money's not that much different. You see, if you want to have money in your future, you have to pay attention to money and learn about it today. Just like with your children, if you want your children to be a part of your future, it's very difficult to count on them being part of your future if you're not pouring into them today. Now, we all know that would be ridiculous to say, I want to be a good parent. I want to have grandkids. I want to have long-term lasting relationships with my children for decades on end. I'm not going to talk to them while they're little, but later, I think all that stuff's going to work out. It is just as crazy to say, I'm not going to pay much attention to the money, or I'm just going to let my spouse pay attention to the money. And I think I'm going to be confident, comfortable, well-heeled, have enough money, able to take care of our financial future. This doesn't mean you need to know the tax code inside and out, but you need to be learning about it. You cannot abdicate these decisions to anybody else. And this might be the part of the podcast that you just tell your spouse, listen to the first few minutes of this podcast, because I need you to hear this part about when they talk about the spouse that doesn't want to be involved in the money.
Or everyone knows that their health is important and that they need to pay attention to it into the future, but no one thinks they have to work out like a professional athlete to stay healthy into their old age. But pretty much everyone who's studied it knows you ought to be at least getting your heart rate up for 20, 30 minutes, 3 times a week. Like, that's all we're saying here. You don't have to get a degree in personal finance, but just saying, I don't have the time, and hand it all off to an advisor and say, wake me up in 30 years and tell me it worked out, will not work out.
Totally.
Right,
Well said. So that's it on that article. I think we hopefully have surfaced that in a way, but I just so encourage all of you who perhaps have a spouse, has somebody that wants to abdicate all of that to you, bring them into these meetings, have them sit there. And if nothing else, it's like, sometimes there is a parent that doesn't like going to the recital, but you go to the recital anyway. Well, maybe sometimes your family's planning meeting with whatever financial firm you use, maybe sometimes your spouse needs to be there just watching like we do at the recital, but they're taking it in, they're getting experience, they're learning something that eventually and almost certainly they will need to know one day.
So now to the regularly scheduled portion of our program. So you've noticed the title, and you might be wondering what we're talking about, what we're really going to get into. And at this point, you've all done, if you've going to do planning, if you do any annual plans, you've done the 2020 planning.
Yeah, you
You've
probably
been
already
through
did
the
it in
sessions.
December, November.
Right. You had the rah-rah, maybe you got inspired or motivated, got some big goals, big dreams, and we want you to listen to this and then go back and review those plans to make sure they're serving you, because so much of what we've seen and done in years past and learned from our mistakes doesn't serve and fully serve the future that you want to have.
Yep. And we live in this society where everything is about the progress of your career or the progress of your business. And let me give that distinction. Your career is the way you're known. Your business that you own is the mechanism that you're currently running.
Two very different things, though.
But if you're an employee, you also have a career, but the career is not the job you're in. The career is the way you're known in the community of other professionals. And so business owners also have that career. So whether you're that high income executive listening or the business owner, the bottom line is you have a career, and everybody does the business planning and the career planning, everything else. They do all of that first. And then it's kind of like our families, our personal lives, our personal health, our well-being, our education, everything else is all supposed to just draft in behind that wherever there's room in life left over. We're seduced by the future title we might have, or the employee count, or the locations we'd have, or whatever our top line sales revenues numbers are. We get stuck on that, but neglect just planning out what we want our life to look like.
And I just thought of this right now. As a business owner, you also want your employees to be planning their future first, their personal.
Totally.
Because if they're not getting that handled, they will not be the employee that you want them to be in your business. So it is in your best interest to pass this on and help them be aiming at their personal goals inside of, and have the work with you being inside of where they want to get in their life.
So let's think about that. So we want to be in a position personally where you, as a business owner, know your aims, but you know your personal aims, and that you're demonstrating, focusing when you're at work, all of the things that we all have to do as business owners every single day. You're focusing on that, and your team gets a chance to witness it. And when they get a chance to witness it, it serves as an example for them to realize they need to take care of their personal aims so that they can better take care of the business aims or be more invigorated about the future that the business is creating. This is not something you need to do just for you, but you do have to start with you. There's no way you could make this a part of your company culture if it didn't start with you first. So here's one of the first things that people get tripped up by in this, is that you want to start with, here's what I want to achieve this year. But all too often what happens is we push our happiness over the cognitive horizon, mainly because we didn't plan for what life could look like. Meaning, if you think about, if you had a plan to build a house and you had the house totally doped in, you knew exactly what you wanted all the way down to the kitchen countertops. And then when you build it, you're following that plan and you end up with those kitchen countertops just like you thought. And you can think to yourself, 3 years ago, I envisioned that, and here it is. And there's a way that is so deeply satisfying for you as a person to just realize, I said I was going to do this, and then you achieved it. The trouble is most people don't have plans written like that. I'm going to go back to that house example again. It comes time to pick out the kitchen countertops. And now we're not choosing from a design that we built some time ago. We are in the moment with the countertop salesman's narrative, trying to get us to select a higher grade or whatever it was. And we'll oftentimes end up spending capital, spending opportunity, spending time in a way to make us happy in the moment, primarily because we never in the past said what would produce contentment. And contentment, not like we relaxed our standards, but contentment like the realization that I set forth to do this some time ago, and here it is now realized in my life, and I can take enormously deep satisfaction in that. But here's one of the worst things you could do is not writing it down and being aware of it in the past so you run into it in the future. What is one of the things that can really slow people, Cory, if they're just running around and instead of writing stuff down, they just run around and tell everybody what they're quote unquote going to do this year?
Well, so this is my biggest pet peeve in the world of motivational planning is they say, okay, first thing, have a giant goal, not an itty bitty goal, but the bigger the goal, the better. And then tell everybody about it so that you have no choice but to go and do it. Otherwise, you're going to look like a fool. Well, I think you need to tell a couple of key stakeholders in your life and your business, your spouse, some of your business partners. Like there's a few people that definitely need to know about your goals.
Someone who will support you, or somebody who is going to hold you accountable. Those two groups of people. That is not everybody.
Right. And they should be small because we've read some research. I'm not the scientist. I don't understand all of it. And I can't even remember the paper right off the top of my head. So you're just going to have to like live with this with me. But what it said was maybe every time you tell someone about this goal you have, your brain actually shoots off some of the chemical cocktail that's exactly what happens when you achieve something. So it's like you're giving yourself some of that having achieved it feeling without actually having done it. And so you sit back like not feeling like you need to do it anymore because you already got the feeling that your brain was hoping for. So it actually takes the kicks your legs right out from under you the more people you tell about this goal.
Yeah, and there's like a seeking mechanism that breaks down. If you guys, anybody goes back and read any of the early thinking about motivational theory by folks like Dr. Maxwell Maltz, and what you start to see is that you get a payoff, that dopamine hit, all of that oxytocin that hits the system when people like, oh my, like their eyes get bigger and they go, oh my gosh, that sounds so exciting and all that. Now I've experienced this a great deal because come June 1, my family and I leave on a 1-year RV trip. And I was just at a party the other night with a bunch of entrepreneurs here in the Seattle area. And the amount of times like, oh my gosh, I wish I could do that. That sounds so fun. Where are you going to go? What are you going to do? And I can feel that feeling just among those social relationships. And the thinking to myself was, all right, it's a good thing I have a lot of structures that are already carrying this through. And I'm so far down the pipe on this because that felt great. And I think can sometimes leave the end result activity off the table. If you guys want to experiment with this, just run around your office today saying, hey, pick a century ride and then tell people you're going to go do the century ride. I'm going to go ahead, gear up, and I'm going to do it on this date. And just watch how people light up and notice how you feel. And you'll kind of get a sense of why casting it out in the future. Now, the other problem is if you tell people, you have no objective thing you can look back on for you to realize that you achieved it. Because now it's this kind of amorphous set of conversations that are out there, not something real and concrete you can look at. Because the other thing that we tend to do is we might write down what we plan to do this year. But number one, that part is only a business plan for most of you listening. And two, when do we look at the business plan again after we set it up in January and maybe present it in a team meeting?
During the next November business planning.
Yeah, because I need to open that document, change the date, update the numbers, and then pump it out again so I could do it for the team meeting. That if those plans are not revisited on a consistent, ongoing basis to produce realization where we're achieving them or not, they're useless. That's true for business plans also, but our personal. Like I have been working for a year to get to where I can do 10 pull-ups in one set. Now, that is in part difficult for me because there's a certain amount of carrying weight that's important here. And I've been working on it and I achieved my first 10 pull-ups just the other day. But if it weren't written down in a document that's part of my personal plans for the year, it would have been very easy to be super satisfied at 7. That's more than most people could do. As a matter of fact, when I tell most people I can do 10 pull-ups now, you know what most people say? Oh my gosh, I can't even do 2. So you could see if I had just stopped at 7, I might still feel pretty good about myself. That's why we have to be able to write these things down. If we don't, what we do is we produce a vision of the future that is not that much different than the horizon. And why I say the horizon, think about this for a moment. Cory, if you and I were out on a boat, out in the ocean, what is the horizon?
The horizon is not actually anything. The horizon is...
I want that. Wait. I just want our listeners to sit with that for a second. The horizon does not exist. just doesn't exist. Keep going.
It's only our eyes observing the edge of what we can see.
Yep. It's just that where our visual perception is, the sky meets the water.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's also, for those of you in Texas, you also have a horizon. It's a big flat state and the sky. But all the same, the horizon is just where land meets the sky out in the distance. You can never close in on it. You never get closer. When we have plans that are not written down that we can look back and review, we can never enjoy how far we've come. And we're left in this constant gap, this constant lacking feeling. You probably all felt it. I've had just deep and intimate conversations with amazingly high achieving clients where it feels like it's never enough. And in part, it's because it's not. If what we're chasing is the horizon, that boat can go forever and never make any distance. And that's the same thing because we continue to push our happiness over the cognitive horizon. Those goalposts keep getting pushed back and we'll never achieve them if we're not writing down what those things are. And no wonder people can sometimes be very satisfied for their business listening to this and be deeply unsatisfied on some of the things on their personal front. That's because they may have never had a plan or managed to produce that plan for their personal life with the same level of rigor they would have with a business plan.
So writing things down is absolutely important, but here's some feedback on writing things down. If it's much more than a page or two, the half-life of usefulness falls off like crazy. If you're going to write it down, it needs to be a thing that you can refer back to regularly. Like weekly wouldn't be half bad, but at least monthly, so that you can see, are your actions right now moving towards the future that you want? And so with that in mind, we have a giveaway for you. We have a tool called the Ambition Navigator. Now, it's one sheet of paper, although you do write on both sides. So I suppose it's 2 pages. But it has some different boxes to fill in around lifetime ambitions and goals, and then shorter term from there, and some certain actions you can be in, people that you might want to be involved in, and other people are going to be involved in getting you to achieve these goals. None of us is doing it on our own. So there's a lot of moving parts to this Ambition Navigator. You might be able to kind of muddle through some of it and figure it out to your liking just by downloading it, which you can do on our show notes page. But I also am going to make an offer of a 15-minute orientation call with someone from our team. That link will also be there. Now, I've some time budgeted to meet with the first 5 people who respond. But past that point, it may have to be another member of our team, but someone would love to help you figure out how to use this tool, because we found it really useful. We've been using it for 6 years now, Paul, I think.
Yeah. And it's the idea that we just need to make sure that the actions that we're in our business life aren't just achieving our business aims. If they're not taking care of our personal aims, they're not going to close the distance. Now, some people would say, okay, great, I'm going to get this Ambition Navigator. I'm going to do it on my own. No. If you have a spouse, do this with your spouse.
Yes.
Now, here's the kind of heavy talk. If you and your spouse are not creating your future together, you may not have a future together. I'm going to say that again because I know it's heavy. Dropping it right in the middle of a podcast. This is tough. Some of you listening have been through divorces. Some of you listening may have very close friends going through divorces. It's real, and it's real painful. But in reality, if we're not creating our future with our spouse, we're not likely to have a future with our spouse. Now, you might, like sometimes it turns out, sometimes it happens. Sometimes there are marriages that are effortless and not a problem, but I tell you that's just not normal. What's normal is it's hard as all get out. And we have to work together to share a future together. Now, I'll give you kind of the funny version of this. When my wife and I were dating, I remember telling her one day, I don't think it matters who I marry. And she said, what? And we were pretty serious at the time.
Wait a second.
Yeah.
I mean, I know you're married still.
Yeah.
But so you said something along the lines of, baby, I'm really happy to be marrying you, but I don't really think it matters if it's you or not.
That's right. Yeah. That's what I said. For those of you that perhaps have been listeners to the podcast for a while, may not be surprised by this little revelation. And for those of you who have gotten to know my wife over the years, you're definitely not surprised by this revelation.
No, you're not.
But here's why I said that, is that I think what matters for our marriage to work. See, I was married and then divorced when I was pretty young. And one of the things that I realized about that is that we were not created. We were both doing our thing and married and living in the same house, but we were not creating our future together. And in sharing with my wife, what I said is I think what matters for our marriage is that our commitment to God first, our commitment to our spouse above ourselves second, then ourselves, and then our children, kind of in that order of commitments. And I think if we can both commit to that, then 10 years from now, when I promise you we're going to be very different people than we are today. In fact, we would be some sort of failures in our own personal development if we weren't very different people 10 years hence. And because we're going to be very different people 10 years from now, I'm going to be married to somebody different in a decade anyway. Now, it's going to be the same person. There's no divorce, but I'm married to a very different person today than I married originally. And so if you don't have a plan to grow together, there's only one other way that those relationships can grow.
That's heavy and important. It's so important. And so that's our relationship. But here's how it actually is important to your business in light of your relationship. By telling your spouse, creating that future together, you've got someone who can actually celebrate the success with you, and for you to have a real cheerleader for your business and the work that you're doing. Because too often, if you're not creating that together, then how are they going to feel about the long hours that you're spending? And do they feel like it really is important to do all this work, and I've got to go on this trip and I've got to do that? There might be some resentment that builds there if you don't create that future together first. But if you create that future, then like, well, honey, they ask you, is this thing you want to do important for what we want? And you say, yes, it's vital. Done.
Yes.
Like that's it.
Can you share a little bit about kind of your personal journey the last couple of years on that exact front and the potential for that resentment to build?
Sure. Happy to. So it is hard for me to have Danielle gone as much as she is in her residency. So for folks who haven't been listening, my wife,
what does your wife do for work?
Yeah, she's a pediatrician.
She's a doctor.
She's a doctor in residency, which is traditionally the horror show of long hours, work to the bone, do the math on their hourly wage. It's practically, indentured servitude. Like all of that is
while
true.
Racking up debt.
Well, the debt's already racked up. Right. The debt was racked up before. And so, when she's doing her overnight shifts or 24-hour shifts, and it's, in the middle of the week, and we don't practically see each other more than an hour over 3 or 4 days, it's really hard. And we're both invested in the future we're creating together. Like before she started this medical school path to become a doctor, we got invested in the future that we want to create together. So it's working for our future, even if I don't like some of the moments, a lot of the moments along the way, even though they're hard. But it's just like working out in the midst of a hard set of sprints, or you're doing some final weightlifting, or the last 15 minutes on the elliptical. A lot of us don't like those moments. In that moment doesn't feel good, but it's a part of a future that we want to have just for our health. This is why it's so important to create that future for your spouse, because hard times are gonna happen. You've got to be invested in where you're going together.
Yeah.
And with that, I think a great time to go to a commercial. I mean, we've talked about everything from drunk teachers to baby, I love you, but it doesn't really matter. Like who knows what's going to happen next when we come back and wrap up the show. So stay tuned.
Hey, everybody. I had to interrupt our show for just a moment to share with you something new. We've designed a new white paper that we think is going to add you value in the way that you think about money. It's 3 of the biggest mistakes we see people make and 6 ways to fix them. Now, for some of you, you might not want the white paper. You might be ready to have a conversation with us, and that is okay. You can email us at info@sfgwa.com. That's info@sfgwa.com. Find us on the web at yourbusinessyourwealth.com. And anytime on any of our social media platforms, send us a message and we can get you this white paper. But in the meanwhile, if you want to just skip over the white paper, have a philosophy conversation with us, we're happy to do that with you. Just let us know philosophy conversation in the subject line. And if you want this white paper, just put white paper in there and we'll immediately get out to you this white paper on the 3 biggest mistakes that we see people make and the 6 things that you can do to fix them. And now, back to our show.
All right, welcome back to Are Your 2020 Plans Going to Bring You the Life that you create the life that you want? Paul, you are going to get us started on some real action steps and structures that folks can take to start making this a reality.
Indeed. Well, one of the first things I would have everybody who owns a company who's listening right now is to look at the business plan that you probably already built prior to listening to this. And just read through, print it out, grab yourself a red pen. That's right. I want you to channel your inner high school teacher. Ideally, I had one teacher, never forget, Mr. Griggs, had a felt tip red pen, the one that had the little white star at the end. They were super cheap pens, but red all the way around the pen with a little white star at the end. Man, I did not like seeing that thing come out. In any case, when you go back through that plan, I want you to just write, what are the things in that plan that you're starting? What are the things that you're currently doing that you need to stop? And what are the things you're currently doing that need to be modified? So it's start, stop, modify. Now, the Ambition Navigator that Cory spoke about earlier has this section in it. But here's the key, is an awareness of, wait, there's some things we've never done before that we need to start doing. There's things we've been doing that aren't working and we need to stop those. And then things that we've been doing that we need to modify for better outcomes, and we need to modify those. Now, that's true of the business plan you already built. But for most people, you probably hadn't yet, prior to listening to this, invested the same in being able to build that same detail into what you want your life with you and your spouse and your family and your fitness, your lifestyle to look like this year. So you can look at what you've been doing on the personal front and build that same awareness. For instance, it might be a modify, could be I've been going to the gym 3 days a week. I'm going to modify and I'm just going to work out for 30 minutes every day, no matter what, because it's lower cognitive load than being on some days or off other days. That might be a modify. Stop is like, I need to stop eating ice cream. I need to stop using why when I ask my spouse why something's done or not done, because it triggers defensive mechanisms.
Love
all that. So you start those and just realize that in your personal life, there's a whole set of things you're already doing, and in the business too, but we're talking about your personal aims today, is that too often we don't realize that that there are things already going on. There is a train already moving down the tracks, and sometimes it needs to be stopped, and that stop can require a truckload of energy. And if we're just mindlessly saying, I'm going to just, for instance, if you're going to spend more time in the gym, there's something you're stopping. Oh, I'm going to stop eating beer and chicken wings every night and having beer and chicken wings, and I'm instead going to go to the gym. So there's a stop that probably needs to offset any start that you've got in your life.
Yeah.
So that simple start, stop, modify exercise can work really well. Now, one side note, it also works great for wrapping up a meeting. You've just had a meeting with your team. What's one of the biggest complaints about meetings in large organizations, Cory?
They don't accomplish anything, just talking for talking's sake.
That's it. Nothing ever gets done. So imagine just stopping every one of your meetings. You want to test how powerful start, stop, modify is? You say, okay, guys, what did we agree to that we're going to start today? What did we agree to that's going to stop? And what, if anything, did we agree is going to modify from the way we're doing it before? And that's how you close those meetings. Far more productive. Same thing with you and your spouse. You sketch out the future that you want this next year. Think about, domains of health or relationship or sociality or money. We got all those sketched out. Here's how we'd like our year to look. This is what we want our personal life to look like. This is what we think that's going to cost. So you have your personal aims, you have your financial aims of what that's going to cost, which also includes you work with your advisor to figure out that also means I need to save X amount more on top of that so I can fund the lifestyle when I'm no longer working. That's the financial ambition. Then you build a career or business ambition. But each time you do that, it's going to require you start, stop, modify something else. So let's talk a little bit, just closing out about what to go do with all these items we talked about. Number one is just make this a more regular activity. Take time to consider what you want your personal life to look like and how your business or career are going to serve that. All too often, we live our personal lives in service to that career, in service to the company we built. And then one day we pick our heads up and say, okay, now I need to make sure that I have some personal time and I have all of this. I want to encourage all of you, making the life that you want to live first is attainable much earlier in the career cycle than most of us, the way we relate to it, which is once I get this done, then I'll do that. Once I get this person hired, then I'll do that. Once sales get above X, then I'll worry about my personal life. And I'm telling you, those two things are not mutually exclusive. You can do them together, and it's going to give you more connection to all the hard work that does have to happen to build the business and career that you want. But you're going to do it with a level of vigor and vision for the future because you have a straight line connection to the way that's going to benefit you personally in the life that you want to live. So
great.
Cory, we have a featured review this week.
Review. I'm excited to read this one. This is from Josh Christ.
This was a birthday present to me, which is November 19th was my birthday. And I just want everybody to know who's listening. I'm not mentioning that because I want large, unsolicited, and very expensive gifts sent to my office. It's not why we're saying that. Mailing address can be found on sfgwa.com. Cory, please continue. I just wanted to make sure people didn't think that's why we were bringing up my birthday. It's November 19th.
So Josh says, love this podcast. Paul and Cory are incredible hosts and bring on a wide variety of guests who all cover an equally wide and empowering array of topics. What makes this podcast stand out is the focus of understanding what it's like as an entrepreneur working to build long-term personal wealth through your efforts. It's clear that both Paul and Cory understand the nuances of that conversation, and it makes each interview well worth replaying. Thank you both for doing the work that you do. Well, thank you, Josh, and you're welcome.
Yeah, that is a great one, Josh.
Great.
I want to apologize. Send us your medical bills for the carpal tunnel in your thumbs. That was a really, really great review to get on Apple iTunes, and we know it takes a little while to not only have that so well worded, but actually all properly spelled and grammar is correct. So that probably took some time and effort, but it does make a difference. It makes a difference not only because we're going to send you a copy of our book as soon as we have your mailing address, but more importantly, that review shows somebody else this is a show to listen to and can make an enormous difference in those other people's lives. So I can't encourage you enough to do that. Also can't encourage you guys enough to get online, get to our website. The link is going to be in the description for this episode's page. You can click on it, get the download of that Ambition Navigator. And for those of you that think you could use it, just schedule that time with Cory. We love doing things for our listeners. They're going to help them further what's important to them in their life. And as always, we hope that this episode has been a contribution to you being able to design and build a good life. Hey guys, so glad you could tune in and watch that video. I want to remind you to subscribe, be sure to hit the notification bell so you can get the latest piece of financial knowledge we release. And don't forget, go to Amazon, get a copy of Sound Financial Advice. Why? Because it'll make you better looking and smarter.